Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be sharing the ultimate fantasy romance tier ranking 50 popular fantasy romance books. Alright guys, so if you're familiar with my channel, you know I love a good tier rank video. So I realized it has been quite a while since I've done a popular fantasy romance tier rank. So I picked out books by Sarah J. Maas, Jennifer L, Armentrout, Rebecca Yarros, etc. And I am going to rank them to see how they hold up. Now, because there is 50 books, I am going to give a very brief synopsis of every book that will be spoiler free. Some of the very popular books I might only give a few sentences just because this will be a longer tier rank video, but hopefully you'll be able to discover your next fantasy romance read. And if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Patreon, Goodreads, and Instagram, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's tier rank these fantasy romance books. Alright guys, welcome to the tier rank. Now I am going to go over the different tiers, even though they are pretty self-explanatory. So first up we have Obsessed. I adored absolutely everything about this book. I will recommend this book to every single person I encounter. It is like God tier. I just loved it. Then we have Love, which I probably rated this book 5 stars. I will recommend it also to absolutely everyone. I really love this book. However, there might have been 1 or 2 things I wasn't crazy about that prevented it from getting to that Obsessed tier. Then we have Okay. So with this tier, I probably really enjoyed the book while I was reading it. However, it might have been a little forgettable. There might have been a few things that I just wasn't a fan of. So Okay is still a very solid read, just not one of my faves. Then we have Not For Me. So this is a book that either has a trope I'm not a fan of or the way it was written. There's something about it that I didn't enjoy. However, I know there are people out there that would probably love this book. So that is the Not For Me category. And then last up, we have Nope. I didn't enjoy this book. I don't think other people will enjoy this book. This book just did not work for me. So with that being said, I would like to remind everyone that reading is subjective. So please, if I review a book negatively, but it sounds like a book that you'd be interested in, don't let this prevent you from picking it up. Please, reading is subjective. We all have very different tastes. So with that all out of the way, let's get into these books. Now, like I said, I will give a spoiler-free plot synopsis of at least the overall series. I do have multiple books in the same series, and I don't want to give away any spoilers. So starting off with one of the best, we have Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. I love this series. I recently did a read-along with my patrons for this series. We just finished it 2 months ago, and honestly, on my reread, it's a top fantasy romance series for me. So if you're unfamiliar with the story, we're following Celaena Sardathian, and at the start of this, she is working at a camp in Endover. It's like a slave camp. She's a prisoner, and she is offered a chance to compete in this like gladiator type trials in this kingdom to become the king's main assassin. And when she gets there, there's a bunch of mystery she has to uncover, and then there's friendships that are made, and it's so unbelievably good. The only issue with the series, which I'm about to talk about, is the first 2 books are not my favorite. They feel very young. There's also a love interest in the first 2 books that drives me insane. So with that being said, I am going to put the first book in the Throne of Glass series, and the second book actually in Okay. I don't love Celaena Sardathian as a character. For those of you who have read the series, you know what I'm talking about. I think she changes significantly throughout the series, and once we get to Heir of Fire, I just appreciate her so much more. So with that being said, I'm going to put Heir of Fire in Love. Now, like I said, I did just do a read-along. Oops, there we go. I did just do a read-along for the Throne of Glass series, and when I reread Heir of Fire, I was positive it was going to be in Obsessed. However, I forgot how one of the main guys treats the main FMC, and I wasn't as crazy about it this time. So I still gave it like 4.75, just not my absolute fave anymore. Then we have Queen of Shadows. This is also going to go in Love. I didn't remember loving this book. However, on my reread, oh my gosh, so good. So that is going to go to Love. And also Empire of Storms. However, it is so close between, if I could like have a category in between Obsessed and Love, it would go in between, because I absolutely loved Empire of Storms. There's a scene in that book that is just so good. And the ending, it ends in such a way that like you need the next book, which is why it is so unfortunate that the next book is Tower of Dawn. And without giving away spoilers, Tower of Dawn picks up in a different location following different characters from where Empire of Storms ended. And the characters it follows are characters that I am not a fan of. So with that being said, Tower of Dawn is going in not for me. Although I did like it a little bit more on my reread, I still am just not a fan, and highly recommend tandem reading it with Kingdom of Ash, the final book in the Throne of Glass series. That is our first obsessed God tier book. This book is epic. It has everything. It has action, romance. I cry every time I read the book. It is beautiful. So if you have not read Throne of Glass, please check it out. It is one of the very best. Now, after Throne of Glass, these are slightly out of order, we have the ACOTAR series, A Court of Thorns and Roses. This is my favorite fantasy romance series of all time. I absolutely adore it. It is the series that made me fall back in love with reading, and I know it is the series that has gotten many people hooked to fantasy romance. So it is an amazing series to start with. It is spicy. I've seen some people call it YA. It is definitely not YA, so please know that going in, but I love it so much. So similar to Throne of Glass, I will say ACOTAR, the first book, is between love and okay. I'm gonna put it with okay only because I like two of the other books in the series so much more, and I'll explain. But if you're unfamiliar with A Court of Thorns and Roses, we are following Farah Archeron, and she is this girl living with her two sisters and her father, and she is really the sole provider of food. So one day she goes out hunting, and she lives on the border between the human and fae lands. So she goes out hunting, and she kills a fae, mistaking it for a wolf, and because of this, she is forced to then go live with the High Lord of the Spring Court, kind of like as his captive. And the story goes from there. So the first book is very much a Beauty and the Beast reimagining, and then it shifts and it just becomes the best romance I've ever read. And that happens in the second book, which is why, if I can find it, A Court of Mist and Fury is the second book in Obsessed, and honestly, I'm going to put it in the front because it is my top book on this list. I love A Court of Mist and Fury with all of my heart. It is just so good. So, highly recommend. And then the final book, which is why I put ACOTAR in okay and not love, is A Court of Wings and Ruin. It's the third book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and it has my favorite scene of any of the books, the High Lord's meeting scene. I love that scene. It is so unbelievably good. So for that reason alone, it's in love, and yeah, I'm really happy with that order. Which brings us to our first nope, which is A Court of Frost and Starlight. So while there is a scene in A Court of Frost and Starlight that I do enjoy, I can't exactly say what it is because it is a spoiler. It just takes place through Christmas and there's drinking involved and it's a very cute scene. The majority of this book I did not enjoy, and I just felt like it was very unnecessary. It also changes how the other books were done in terms of POV, and I just didn't love it. So that is our first nope book. I know I am not in the minority. A lot of people are not huge fans of A Court of Frost and Starlight. If it is your fave, I apologize. I could not get into that book. Which brings us to A Court of Silver Flames. This is very difficult because I personally don't love the two characters this follows. They are my two least favorite characters in the series. I still love them. I just love other characters a lot more. And while there were parts of the book I really enjoyed, most of it had nothing to do with the romance. Like, the romance was my least favorite part of A Court of Silver Flames. Also, it was unbelievably spicy compared to the rest of the books in the series. Not that that's a bad thing, I just wasn't expecting it. So I actually think I'm gonna put A Court of Silver Flames in okay. Had it been a year ago, it would probably go in the not for me, but I did reread it somewhat recently, and I think I gave it 4 stars, and the first time I read it, I gave it 3.5. So there are parts I enjoy. The romance was not it for me. Alright guys, before we jump into the rest of the fantasy romance tier rank, I would like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare has been a huge help behind the scenes of my channel, especially a class I recently found on Canva that has taken my content to the next level. Skillshare is an incredible online learning platform with thousands of classes designed for creatives and curious minds. From design and video production to productivity and entrepreneurship, there's something for everyone. Personally, I've taken their social media content creation in Canva class, which has made a huge difference when it comes to creating my YouTube thumbnails, video backgrounds, and Instagram stories. The Skillshare Canva class is perfect from taking your designs from beginner to pro. It's given me the tools to make everything look polished and cohesive, whether that be my Instagram stories or YouTube thumbnails. Skillshare also has a wide range of classes on topics like design, freelance tips, and even starting a creative side hustle. They also author learning paths, which are step-by-step class collections to help you master a new skill. If you're looking to level up your content or learn something new, Skillshare has got you covered. And with fall being such a productive season, now is the perfect time to explore new skills or passions, and Skillshare makes it super easy. And the best part, the first 500 people that click the link down the description below will receive a free month of Skillshare. So don't miss out, start learning today. Which brings us to the most controversial series probably in this video. It is the Crescent City series. I will say, I enjoyed the first book. So if you're unfamiliar with the Crescent City series, it is the most recent series by Sarah J. Maas. It is an urban fantasy. We are following Bryce Quinlan, and after a tragedy, she decides that she is going to try to uncover a murderer and try to figure out who is the culprit of a murder. I'm trying to do this without spoiler, guys. That's why it's very, very difficult. But anyway, she ends up teaming up with Hunt Athalar, who is a fallen angel, who's going to help Bryce track down this murderer, and together they have to uncover secrets. And this is all happening in the city of Lunathian, which is filled with fae, vampires, and a bunch of other supernatural creatures. And the story goes from there. So I kind of knew I wasn't a huge fan of urban fantasy when I started this, so I knew this wasn't going to be my absolute favorite Sarah J. Maas series. I was just expecting to like it a little more than I did. So I am going to put the first book, Crescent City, in love. The entire second half of that book is some of the best writing I've seen from SJM, and character development and grief. It is just so well done, and I've reread that first book at least 4 times, and every time I sob like a child during a specific scene. So I do love the first Crescent City book. It is really good. It is very close to obsessed. However, we then get to House of Sky and Breath. This is gonna go to nope for me. Unfortunately, I've actually reread this book 3 times because I did a recap video for it, and I do not plan on ever rereading this book again if I can help it. There is just a lot of information packed into this book. It reads almost like a textbook, at least for me personally, and I just didn't get a big enough payoff in the 3rd book to warrant how dense and just how much was going on in House of Sky and Breath. So it's a nope for me. I know a lot of people really enjoyed it, so I'm very happy for you guys if you loved it. I just wasn't a fan. And the 3rd book, I'm actually going to put with not for me, because I do understand a lot of people loved the 3rd book. A lot of my friends even gave it 5 stars. I had a lot of little issues with it. I kind of wish we got more of a certain crossover, and I wish certain things were handled differently. The entire ending of the book felt very sci-fi and not similar to the tone of the other books. I could go on for days. I actually have a live show on my channel that I'll try to link down the description below if you want to get my in-depth thoughts of the 3rd book in the Crescent City series. But overall, I wasn't a fan. So I'm going to put for not for me, because while I did really dislike book 2, I do think there's a lot of things in book 3 that were very well done, and I think that there are a lot of people out there that will really, really enjoy it. I just was not one of those people, unfortunately. So, moving on. I think that's it for Sarah J. Maas. So now we're going to go into From Blood and Ash. This is the book that started my booktube channel. My first video ever was a From Blood and Ash deep dive. I love this series. I'm going to put it with obsessed. Now, I know not everyone is going to think that. There's definitely a lot of critiques to this series, but the first book is just so well done in terms of romance, and it hooked me instantly, and I just absolutely loved it. So if you're unfamiliar with From Blood and Ash, the series overall, we are following Poppy, and she is being raised in isolation, getting ready for her ascension. We don't exactly know what the ascension is, we just know it is a ritual, and unfortunately Poppy, because of this, is forced to not really talk to anybody except for select staff, like her personal guard and her one friend. So one day she decides she's gonna go out and have a little fun, so she gets in disguise and goes to the Red Pearl, where she meets Hawk, who is the newest member of the Rise Guard. They have a little moment, and then Hawk soon becomes her personal guard, and the story goes from there. It is so good. There are vampires, there are werewolves, there are all of these paranormal creatures, there's politics, it is just perfection. So I absolutely love From Blood and Ash. Kingdom of Flesh and Fire. This is book 2 in the From Blood and Ash series. I'm gonna put it with love, mostly because the ending of From Blood and Ash, there are so many big reveals that it kept me so hooked in A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, and I just overall enjoyed the romance. There's still a lot of angst, despite the fact that it seems like the romance is pretty much set in the first book. The second book, there's still a lot of back and forth, so I did really enjoy it. There's also a carriage scene that takes place in the middle of a war that just lives rent-free in my brain, just because of how ridiculous, but also amazing it was. So that is why that is in love. Now they're slowly going to start going down, I think, in ratings. So after that, we have The Crown of Gilded Bones. This I am going to put with okay, only because honestly, I don't remember what happens in The Crown of Gilded Bones. I remember what happens in The War of Two Queens, because there is a very controversial scene that takes place in the fourth book that a lot of people had a lot of opinions on, that personally I didn't mind, because we knew it was going to happen, but I know what happens in that book. So Crown of Gilded Bones I'm going to put with okay, because we needed it to advance the story, which brings us to The War of Two Queens, which I'm also going to put in okay. My issue with A War of Two Queens wasn't that particular scene, it was the fact that I wanted so much more from the MMC. He just really lost a lot of personality in that fourth book, and I wanted how he was originally kind of back, which does happen in A Soul of Ash and Blood, which is kind of like a rehashing of the series, but from another POV, and I loved it, and it made me remember why I fell in love with the series in the first place, because by the time I read The War of Two Queens, I was kind of doubting how much I really love this series, but A Soul of Ash and Blood was a really nice reminder. So that is going in love. Also really close to Obsessed, but it's not quite as good as the first From Blood and Ash book. And that brings us to Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. A lot of you guys are gonna hate me for this one. I am putting Fourth Wing in Obsessed. I really enjoyed this book. I think it is a great fantasy romance book for those who are new to fantasy romance. It is a fun time. The writing is so accessible, and I loved the romance and the characters. So yes, I do feel like some parts of the book did feel very young and YA. There is spice in this book. I've noticed every time I say that it does feel YA, people respond in the comments being like, but there's spice. Yes, there is spice, so definitely it is not for younger readers. I just feel like some of the decisions the characters make and the tone of the book feels a little bit younger, a little bit more young adult, but overall, I really liked it. Now, Iron Flame, I'm gonna put with love. I didn't like it quite as much as Fourth Wing. However, I still think it's a very solid read. I think it sets up a lot of what is going to happen in the third book. My opinion, however, might change depending on that third book, because if there isn't a good enough payoff, then Iron Flame might end up going down to okay. But as of now, it's love. I'm going to reread it very soon. I want to do a recap before the next book releases in January. So I'm really excited. Which brings us to When the Moon Hatched, and that is going straight up to Obsessed. I ended up kind of buddy reading this with my husband, and we both really enjoyed it. Now, the writing in this takes a while to get used to, and if there was not an audiobook, I would not have been able to finish this book. However, I am obsessed with Sarah A. Parker's writing. The way she writes books, it's very verbose, but it's almost like a puzzle you have to solve. I just realized I did not give you a synopsis for When the Moon Hatched, but we are essentially following this girl who is working for part of like a rebellion group, and she ends up getting captured. And while this is going on, there is another guy who is searching for the remnants of dragons who have fallen. They end up finding each other, and it's kind of like their story. There's so much more to it than that, but a lot of it is a spoiler. But overall, I really enjoyed it. Just highly, highly recommend the audiobook. And next up is Fear the Flames by Olivia Rose Darling. I actually just finished this book 2 days ago. It is going in obsessed. It is worth all of the hype. Now, I will say this book was originally released as Indie Pub, and it was picked up by a traditional publisher and re-released, but it is significantly shorter than the original publication. So I'm very curious what was omitted, because I heard from a lot of people this was very dense, there was a lot of world building, it was very heavy in the politics, and I didn't really find that. I felt like the romance was very much at the forefront, although there is a really fun found family and heist and action and dragons. I pretty much love every fantasy romance that has dragons in it. But overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. So let me know if you've read this, what you thought of it in the comments, especially if you've read the original version and this new version. I want to know what was taken out. But if you're unfamiliar with Fear the Flames, we are following this princess who was essentially kicked out of her kingdom, or she escaped her kingdom after her father locked her up and stole her dragons from her. So she has started kind of like a secret kingdom in another area, but she wants to get her dragons back. So she teams up with her father's rival, and together, along with some friends, they decide they are going to try to perform this heist and get the dragons. And it goes from there. The main male character uses angel as a term of endearment, and it is my new obsession. So highly, highly recommend. I absolutely loved it. And once again, worth all of the hype. Okay, we have reached the Zodiac Academy. Now, I can't really go into what happens in every book just because, one, it is one of the longest series I have ever read, and two, it will give away all of the spoilers. So just to give you an overview of the Zodiac Academy, we are following these two twin girls, Darcy and Tori, and they have grown up pretty much with just each other to depend on. And when they turn 18, they find out they are actually Fae royalty, and all of these paranormal creatures exist in another realm. And the vampire who has told them this information says, hey, I'm actually a professor at said university, and if you come to the Zodiac Academy and graduate, you can claim your inheritance and become the queens. So they agree, and unfortunately when they get there, they find out that there are already these celestial heirs that are ruling the school, and they don't want to deal with these two Vega queens. And it's kind of like a bully romance, but then it progresses into one of the most epic books I have ever read, or series I have ever read. The romances are so, so addicting. I will also say the writing is not the best. However, I still enjoyed the story up until a point. So we are about to discuss it. So first up, we have the first Zodiac Academy book. Ooh, okay. Let's figure this out. I think it's gonna go in okay, because I remember when I first picked this book up, there were words like Fae book, and it was just, some of it was cringy. However, I was intrigued enough that I kept going, and that is when I got to the second book, which is actually my favorite in this series because of a certain scene in a pool that I absolutely loved it. So that I think is the only one that's gonna go in obsessed. Then we got to, I think this is book 3. I'm going to put that in love. And book 4 is going to go in love. I did love both of these books. I was hooked. I loved the characters. I loved everything that was going on. Then we get into, I forget the name of this one, but book 4, and I'm kind of like, ooh, there's a lot happening. How are we going to wrap all of this up? Because at the time, I believe this was only supposed to be a 6-book series, and it slowly kept getting longer and longer and longer. And that is when we got to these final 3 books. So first up, this one is going to go with, actually, this one can go with okay. Still, it's between okay and not for me, because we are just dragging out this series so long. I will also say this one will go with not for me, because I cried a lot in Heartless Sky. Now that I'm thinking about it, there were some very touching moments that were done very, very well. However, this one is going to go with not for me because, one, this book was unbelievably long. 2, there are POVs in this book that I literally had to research who these characters were because it has been so long since we have seen those characters. And the ending of this book left so much open that I just don't know how we're going to finish it in one book. Apparently they did. I haven't read the final book yet. but that is going to go with not for me. So, you know what? We're going to move Heartless Guy down too. Heartless Guy is also going to go for not for me because there's so many things that opened up that I just feel like didn't need to be there. So despite the fact it did have some very touching moments, those two are going to go for not for me. So it hurts because I did absolutely love the series when it first started. I just slowly started to lose interest, and yeah. I do want to pick up the Ruthless Boys of the Zodiac though soon. That is like a Why Choose series set in the same world that I've heard really good things about. All right, next up we have Serpent and the Wings of Night. Unfortunately, I've only read the first book in this series and not the second. I will say I loved this book. It was unbelievably popular when I read it, and I was afraid it wasn't going to live up to the hype. But because this book just drops you in the middle of essentially a tournament to the death, it keeps you engaged the entire time, and I loved it. I did not find it predictable at all. The romance was pretty good, but it wasn't at the main focus, it felt like. However, I did hear the second book, Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, does deal a lot more with the romance. And then there is a third book releasing. However, I do believe it's following different characters. Okay, so we are slowly making our way through. Next up, we have Spark of the Everflame. I am going to put that in love. While I did really enjoy Spark of the Everflame, and I will definitely be rereading it soon, I didn't love it quite as much as Glow of the Everflame. If you're unfamiliar with Spark of the Everflame, we are following Diem, and she is this girl that is living in a world that is ruled by the Descended, and these Descended are descended from gods, which is why they're kind of like the ruling class, and they treat humans pretty poorly, or at least a good majority of them do. So Diem and her boyfriend are kind of starting to form this rebel group, or a part of this rebel group, that is trying to take the Descended down. That is until Diem's mom, who is a healer, goes missing, and Diem has to decide who she wants to align herself with. And it is one of the slowest of slow burn romances, but it is so, so good. Glow of the Everflame is going up with Obsessed. I loved it so much. So I'm very excited to read Heat of the Everflame. However, I am waiting for the fourth book to release. Okay, I did decide to throw some popular YA series in here as well. So we have the Cruel Prince series. This is also going to be a little bit of a controversial take. Cruel Prince, I am going to put very much with okay. I thought this book was going to be similar to ACOTAR. I think when I picked it up, that's what it was touted as, and I did not find that it was similar to ACOTAR at all. I did enjoy it, it's just not what I was expecting. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the story, we're following Jude Duarte, and it has been so long since I've read this, so let's see if I remember. But she ends up being, I think, adopted after her father ends up killing her mother, and is taken to this Fae world, and she is one of the only humans. I think her sister is also human. And she has to survive with the Fae, and these are like trickster Fae, so you have to watch what they say, because they can't lie, but they can like manipulate truths, and then it kind of goes from there. So the Cruel Prince, I'm going to put with okay. Now the Wicked King, I'm actually going to put with love because I did really enjoy it. I feel like the trickster element was more at play, and I found myself like rereading passages to try to figure out like the hidden meanings. So I did like the Wicked King. Queen of Nothing is a nope for me. I hated the ending of that series. So I don't even want to get into it. I just did not enjoy the ending. So that is 100% going in nope. And then I also wanted to include Powerless. This is a YA series that I know a lot of people have been talking about. I finally got a chance to read it, and it was a really solid read. I am going to put it with okay, only because I haven't picked up the sequel yet, and the sequel's been out for quite a while, and I just haven't had any interest. So while I did really enjoy the first book, I really don't have a lot of motivation to continue with the series, so there was something about it that I just can't pinpoint. But Powerless is essentially following this girl that lives in a world where everyone has powers, and if you don't, you're considered powerless, and I think you're actually killed. It's been quite a while since I've read this. And then our main character ends up in this tournament with other people with powers, and she has to survive, but she's been faking being I think either like a fortune teller or a mind reader or something like that. So overall, it was very solid. It kind of felt like the Hunger Games meets fantasy romance, and Heartless Hunter is another book that has kind of like a similar feel. All right, moving on. We are now at the Plated Prisoner series. I can't believe I am about to do this, but I am putting the Plated Prisoner in love. I DNF'd this book 4 times before I finally finished it, but we really need to see the main character the way she is in Guild in order to appreciate her as she goes through the series. So if you're unfamiliar with the Plated Prisoner series, it is a very loose King Midas reimagining. We are following Auren, and she is the gilded pet of King Midas. King Midas having the power to everything he touches turning to gold. So he has gold-touched our Auren and has been keeping her in his palace kind of just like as this beautiful thing for people to admire. Now, Auren has absolutely no autonomy, and all she cares about is being safe and pleasing Midas and being completely subservient to him. And all of that changes when she is forced to leave the castle and ends up being kidnapped, and it goes from there, and I loved it. So I'm actually going to put all of the books in love, except for the final book. Glow is going in obsessed. The ending of Glow, I was in shock. I just stood there just like, I can't believe it. So I loved Glow, and I feel like it really shows Auren changing, and it's so good. I can't get into spoilers, but it's so good. So the next two books, Gold and Goldfinch, I believe Gold has released, however the audiobook isn't coming out until next year, and then Goldfinch is coming out I think later this year. So I will definitely be getting to those when they release. Then we have Radiance. I wanted to include at least one Grace Draven book, and a lot of people say this is one of the best. It's not enemies to lovers, but it's more like they both find each other repulsive and are forced to get married, and kind of friends to lovers, but it's an amazing read. If you have not read it yet, I feel like it used to be talked about a lot and now less so, and it is so unbelievably good. So in the story, we're just following these two people, and I think one's a princess from like this human group and the other one is a prince, and they end up forming this alliance and being forced to marry in order to like help each other's people, and they immediately just find each other absolutely repulsive, and it's how they kind of get over that and find love within each other, and it's so good. The Bridge Kingdom, I am also going to put in love. I believe this is actually getting re-released with different covers, but this is such a solid story. We're following this girl who her father ended up trading her, and I think it's either her adopted sisters or her sisters. It's been years since I've read this book. And trading them to become assassins in order to kill this guy that owns or is in charge of this bridge where all of like the commerce goes through. So if you control the bridge, you pretty much are very wealthy and control all the commerce that is coming and going in this kingdom. So this guy ends up teaching all of these like girls how to be amazing assassins, and then the one that survives ends up being sent to try to like woo this guy and then kill him and take over the bridge. And it is so good. And next up, we have Six of Crows. Now, is this completely a fantasy romance? Maybe not. It's a YA fantasy. It does have a romance in it. I love Kaz Brekker. Six of Crows is 100% going in obsessed. I love this book. If you are looking for a fantasy romance that involves a heist and the best found family I've ever read in any series, you need to read Six of Crows. We are following this group of people that are trying to pull off a very dangerous heist. And that is all I'm really going to say. It's written by the same author that wrote Shadow and Bone. It's set in the same kind of universe. So it's so good. Crooked Kingdom, while I love it, I'm putting it in the love tier. I'm not quite obsessed. When I reread Six of Crows, I think I've reread that first book like 11 times. But Crooked Kingdom, I've only reread twice. Mostly because there's some sad things that happen in Crooked Kingdom. But overall, I love that duology. It is the best YA duology I've ever read. So please, if you have not read it yet, so worth it. And that brings us to the final series. So we have Once Upon a Broken Heart. So the first book I am going to put with OK. This is a YA fantasy romance series by Stephanie Garber. It is set in the same world as the Caraval series. And in this story, we are following Evangeline Fox, who lives in this world where there are fates, and it is known you never make deals with fates. However, Evangeline's best friend is about to marry her sister, so she goes to Jax, the Fate of Broken Hearts, and begs him to stop the wedding, and he agrees, and all he wants in return is 3 wishes from the men of his choosing, and Evangeline agrees, and it goes from there. So Once Upon a Broken Heart, it was solid. It really sets up this very whimsical fantasy world that feels very fairy tale. However, the Ballad of Never After is one of the best books I've ever written, or YA fantasy romance books I've ever written. The angst I've ever read. The angst in this book and the slow burn romance, all in this beautiful setting. It is chef's kiss. It is amazing. So I absolutely love The Ballad of Never After, which is why it is so sad that I hated A Curse of True Love. So unfortunately, with A Curse of True Love, I feel like there are so many things that are left open at the end of A Curse of True Love that we really needed to have resolved. It also really felt like there was a huge tone shift from The Ballad of Never After to A Curse of True Love. We also get an extra POV of a character that I did not want a POV from. So overall, A Curse of True Love really, really did not work for me. However, I think the first 2 books in the series are so good, it is still worth a read. Alright guys, that is it for my popular fantasy romance tier rank. Please let me know down in the comments below if you strongly disagree or agree with any of my fantasy romance placements. Also, if you guys have any good fantasy romance book recommendations, I love getting recs from you guys. And I'd like to say a special thank you to my Paladin protectors, Amanda, Erin, Leslie, Kat, and Lotta. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. And if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye.